If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you. Hello Internet. I am very honored today to tell you we have with us a Brigadier General, and you know what, he was the officer commanding of the Special Forces Brigade. He did a lot of other things as well. He's known as Cornelius Jansen Bornman. The man does speak Afrikaans, he's a proud Afrikaner. He also speaks German fluently, which I can't speak. I can use a few curse words. But we decided to do this in English so that more people can be reached. So can you tell me, where do you come from?
Of course, first of all, it's a privilege speaking to you. I followed your programs and I deem it very important that we do this thing. I was born in Springs. Now, Springs is just east of Johannesburg. My father was a gold mine manager. Obviously, he started as a normal miner and he worked himself up as a mine manager. And we grew up on a mine, and we were fortunate that we could speak Afrikaans and English because most of the people were English. And the same applies for Zulu we picked up because we believed in Zulu people working. And this really was beneficial to me throughout my whole career. We went to school. If I talk about we, it's my two brothers. We are three sons. And by the way, we all went into the Defense Force. We went to high school in Heidelberg because the mine was quite a distance away from the high school in Springs. It was a good high school. But we went to the boarding school in Heidelberg because for sports and activities and extramural functions, it was that way better. And today, if I glance back in my career and my life, it was a saving grace. That prepared me for the army, and it prepared me for life, being in a hostel. We had very good teachers. Most of my teachers became school principals and superintendents of education. And my two brothers also joined the Defense Force. They retired as colonels. Unfortunately, my brother passed away about it. And yeah, then here in my third last year at school, I felt that I wanted to go to the Defense Force. And the reason was I wanted to do something for my country. At that stage, there were a lot of things against South Africa political. Well, I didn't always agree with all the politics that went on. But I really felt I wanted to join this life of a soldier. I then went to the Army Gymnasium. I think later we will talk about the Army Gymnasium in more detail. In 1966, after I matriculated in 1965. During that period, I applied for the military academy and I was chosen, and being very lucky to go to the military academy to study for a degree. And I think we will also have a whole period or some in-depth talks about the military academy. After that, I was fortunate to go back to old hunting grounds. I went back to Heidelberg because the Army Gymnasium moved from Pretoria to Heidelberg. I was an officer instructor, a platoon commander, a company commander, and even the adjutant, which is the staff officer of the commanding officer. And I want to tell you one thing. There I learned how to run a unit, was being an adjutant, by looking at examples. Some good, and some just. After that, I went to the infantry school. I know the English pronunciation of it is School of Infantry. I was also an officer instructor in CounterInsurgency wing. I really enjoyed my stay in Oudtshoorn. My first daughter was born. In that period, the Rhodesian War started, and I went to Rhodesia on a course, and I learned a lot of things there that we applied later in our activities in Southern Africa. After that, I was chosen to go to Downingtown Combat School to train commandos, citizen force, and the permanent force members also in counterinsurgency, and that was in Kimberley. I think we will also discuss the Downingtown Combat School in detail. Then I was sent to 7th South African Infantry Battalion. Remember now, I was all at schools. I was never on the cold face of the military, having troops, and I was the second in command of a unit 7 SII in Alaborwa. I then went on the staff force, and we're going to discuss more things about the staff force as well. Then I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and I was sent to Sector 20, which was in Wambuland. There were 4 battalions, and I was given the command of 5-4 battalion. It was my first unit command, and I enjoyed all the theory that I people and that I had to go through in my training, I could put in practice, and it was a grand year. Then I was, because this post is away from home, you had to be in your base all the time, and the families were based in Oshakati. I saw my family once every 2 weeks, and once they came and visited me as well. There's a few photos of my daughter standing with me in front of the ops room. Of course, the kids enjoyed it there because they flew in helicopters, and a lot of things happened in that area with them, and which they enjoyed. They had a very good childhood in the military. And my kids always talk about the civilian kids. The civilian way they all 3 joined the defense force, not anymore, but they all studied, and they all had a career in the defense force. I'll come to that later. After that, I was sent back to the Downingtown Combat School as officer commanding, first as second in command, then officer commanding, and it was a very great year for me um, because we started training all the various commands throughout the country, and we trained the officer commandings of the commandos, and we did this on the basis that they did a period of extramural where they studied, and I talk of teletuition, distance training, but I think teletuition is a better word. And then we went to his unit, his area of command, and we helped him there to compile a appreciation. And so I learned the country, and this came in handy. Then I was, after that, I was sent to Soutpansberg military area. That's in the Limpopo province on the Zimbabwe border, and that was part of my responsibilities, a part of the Mozambican border, and a part of the Botswana border. It was a very big responsibility, but it was a very, very good posting to have. At that stage, the ANC was still in Zimbabwe and frequently coming through, and we can talk about that a little bit later. And then the apex came in my career, being appointed as General Officer Commanding of Special Forces. I was then transferred back to Pretoria, and after 4 years being General Officer Commanding, I took a severance package at the age of 50, and I left the Defence Force. But it was really the icing on the cake and the best of all people that I could command, and it was a great year. All in all, I had a very good life, and I had a great military career with a lot of experiences.
Well, that's an overview of a really remarkable career. I wonder, General, can you tell us about the gymnasium? It's a place which I've heard about quite a bit before, but it's not really well known.
Of course, that was a very good institution. After the Second World War, the government decided to establish a military gymnasium. And this was in about the year 1950. And all the people that participated in the Second World War, most of them left the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. But there was a nucleus that stayed behind as career officers. They were career officers before, and now they just carry on with their careers. The war was just part of their careers. There was no training for young people and a reasonable amount of young people. And they started with the military gymnasium. And it started in Pretoria, where they trained the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy. And if you look at the badge of the Army Gymnasium, you will see an anchor, you will see wings, and you will see a gun, an artillery piece, a 25 pounder. And this is when it started with young men going there. And that was the nucleus of the recruitment. And can I say the feeder station, uh, by lack of a better word, for the Defence Force. Not long after that, the Navy went and they established the Naval Academy, Saldanha Bay, and the Air Force in Pretoria, the Air Force Gymnasium, where all our pilots went through, as well as the other branches of the Air Force. And the Army stayed uh, behind. Now, this went on, and it was a prestige because you had to apply and you were selected. Well, they didn't select me on my matric results, perhaps on my rugby results, but in any a bunch of good guys, selected guys. And for a year, I was there in the Army Gymnasium in 1966. Now, as I said, it was the feeder station for the Defence Force, particularly the Army. And it was really great to be there. We had very good instructors. Now, I must point out one thing. The officer commanding of that stage was a veteran of the Second World War. But the rest of the staff were young men that came through the Army Gymnasium. And we, in A Company that year, we were trained to become officers in the National Defence Force. Of course, leaving the Army Gymnasium after a year and then going to the Citizen Force. So I could say for the Army Citizen Force and Commandos, this was the training grounds for them. It was a prestigious unit. In 1966, when I joined the Army Gymnasium, already there was a call-up, a compulsory call-up, and a balloting system. And the units of the infantry, armor, artillery, etc., engineers, and all the service corps already had their units, and they could draw from the Army Gymnasium as an officer or an instructor's corps. The highlights of my career was, first of all, being there, and then we were chosen with the funeral of Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd. We were the last company guard of honor at his gravesite. It was quite remarkable to see and to have a bird's eye view on this whole procession. It was also in this year, obviously, when he was murdered. And it was a great year, and there was a very big esprit de corps. On a yearly basis, the Army Gymnasium, Air Force, and Naval Gymnasium got together in a rugby week and sports weeks. And this was great to see your old school friends and them there and playing various sports against them. But it was really in the true sense of the Greek word gymnasium, a gymnasium where the formative training of young men were done to prepare them for life and for uh, a career in the Defence Force. The Army Gymnasium was very kind to us. In this period, a lot of lectures came around and discussed uh, opportunities where the guys after this year could go and work. We were also allowed to go to Pretoria University to do certain aptitude tests. And they gave us guidance where we could go and which occupation one could follow. So it was a preparatory school and it was good military discipline. And there my military foundation was laid. Due to political and expanding circumstances, in 1967, the Army Gymnasium moved to Heidelberg. There used to be a teachers' training college, and the educational department rationalized and they established a teachers' training college in Johannesburg called Goudstad. Uh, in Afrikaans, we used to call that Stoutgat, but in any case, it's one of those things. English-speaking people won't understand it, but it's not vulgar. Just being normal. So the Army Gymnasium was phased in there, and because normally they in Bangladesh pre-Second World War, and now they some of the troops even had their own rooms, going into the dormitories and occupying the dormitories previous of teachers training students. Then in 1993, the Army Gymnasium, because then we did uh, training for leadership for the various infantry units, passing out of young lieutenants that had to go and command platoons during operations, and corporals supporting them in the platoon structure. That function was passed over to infantry school. Secondly, the Signal Corps took over there because the whole of Voortrekkerhoogte, now Tabachwani, was expanding and there weren't space for people, and that's why they went in there. And then in 1980s, the Army Gymnasium referred back to the original training of infantry again. And in the later years, my one brother, my youngest brother, he was also officer commanding of the Army Gymnasium. Our sweat is all over the place from Pretoria right through to Heidelberg. But in short, the role of the Army Gymnasium as it is today is a little bit different than it was in the day I went into the Army Gymnasium. So this is in very short talking of an institution that one could write books on.
I've seen some old pictures of young men arriving at the Army Gymnasium. And what struck me about these young men is they did look like athletes. They looked very neatly. They were dressed with a tie and a jacket, and they were carrying a very neat suitcases. And then the instructors or somebody from the army was waiting there, and they looked like soldiers. They looked manly, if I can put it like that. And some of them were wearing World War II ribbons, which I could recognize. Ribbons, yes. So would you say that this place was like a boot camp, like a basic training, incorporating all the leadership elements like sport? I've heard they had a good rugby team.
Of course, yes. It was not a boot camp in the true sense of the word that if you don't pass this year, they kick you out. but it was tough. Basic training was tough, but honestly, the training was very practical and functional. Um, really, it was a very good formative year. On the rugby side, our biggest opponents were the police college. And there was a shortcut from the Army Gymnasium via Eastcourt to go to the police. And really, we enjoyed playing rugby against these guys and then seeing how their barracks look. And we speak to them, what's your training and what do we do? Very good camaraderie between the two groups.
Yes, it was so that if you arrived at the police college, even in my days, which was 20 years later, and you were a good rugby player, they would keep you there. So you would really, if you wanted to go home or back to the ocean or wherever you come from, you would not admit that you could play rugby, but they knew. They knew, of course, you could, and then they would make you play.
Throughout my career, that policy was in the Army most definitely cast me was sent to Pretoria and Bloemfontein. That's why those two unions in the olden days were very good unions, and the Currie Cup was transferred between those two unions.
No, that's very true. I think the army had a great team. And of course, you had unlimited manpower to get them, and they were quite fit young men by the time you were done with them. But that's also a good thing. I think sport is actually important for many reasons.
Now, sports play a very important role in the, can I say, the upbringing of a young man. And some of my best friends I met on the rugby field and later years coaching and doing the administration of rugby. By the way, in 19, I must now get my date ready, 82, uh, the Army Rugby Week was held in Kimberley, and I was the host. And at the end of that rugby week, a team was selected, uh, but this was not Army, this was the Defence Force rugby team. And the team was selected to play against Griquas, and we could field about 90% Springbok team. People like Nas Botha and the prince of fullbacks, Hubert. No, all the Springboks were were there, and they did their national service. And this is very important. And that was very good for the esprit de corps of young troops to see that these Springbok heroes of ours are also in the defence force and doing their bit.
I suppose you had the same thing as in the police that whatever game you play, you could not lose.
Oh yes, no, you can't lose.
I have to tell you that the general is living on a farm, and we had considerable difficulties with Zoom as well as the internet. And it took us actually almost a week just to get the connection secured. And as you could have seen before, it was playing around a bit, but let's not worry about that. What we will do now is we'll put the video off, and General Bornman will still talk to us, he'll still answer us. I'll just put a photo of him in here. So I must tell you, I find it very interesting, the gymnasium. You say it's one of those places where, of course, a book should be written about it, or I'm quite sure that perhaps there were, I don't know. What weapons were you trained in there? I would like to go just through a day in the life of somebody attending the Army Gymnasium.
Okay, let's talk of basic infantry weapons. Of course, the R1 rifle at that stage was brand new. Now we've got the later and at present still we have the R4 rifle. We also were trained in the LMG, the light machine gun, and then of course hand grenades and pyrotechnics. we used to do. Then at that stage, we were just shown the 2-inch mortar. Today, we've got the 60 millimeter mortar and the 81 millimeter mortar. At that stage, the other companies, HQ company, which Saki Mare was a member of, they were trained in machine guns and anti-tank weapons, the old pounder gun, anti-tank gun, as well as 3-inch mortars. Now these weaponry, this weapons still come from the Second World War, and that when we later joined, obviously the Vickers machine gun went on, and I still used the Vickers machine gun in the operational area, but it was converted to 7.62 instead of .303 caliber. Obviously, we had 60 millimeter mortars and 81 millimeter mortars, and the artillery even had 120 millimeter mortars, which was a very, very, very good weapon. And then our whole anti-tank arsenal changed into the ANTAC and various other anti-tank weapons. And so we were on the verge at the Army Gymnasium of a period of Second World War weapons going over into the modern weapons that we have today. Interesting enough, when we went on field exercises to save our R1 rifles, not to get them hammered and so on, we still used 303 rifles, but that was just for field exercise periods where there were no live ammunition or anything that could harm you. But these were the weaponry that we were trained in, and that we could later train other people.
Were you in those days, this is about 1965, Rhodesia just became independent. They had the UDI, where Ian Smith, they declared independence of the UK. We were not very far away from the UK in the sense that it's only 4 years later after we became a republic. Were you aware that there was a terrorism threat?
Most definitely, because for one reason, I still have some family now in Zimbabwe. My father's brother was there, and his sons, we are about the same age, and various other, about 10 of our family members were there, and they were all farming. So from the point of view, from their side, it came over, and we were briefed. We were constantly briefed, but obviously now at the level of a troop, that the situation was going on there. And very interesting was, the first incursions in Rhodesia started in 1966. And the same happened to us, because our first contact with SWAPO was at Nkulumbash in August 1966. And the commander from the police side was General Henny de Wet. And from the army side, it was the well-known Captain Jan Breitenbach. He was in charge of the paratroopers of that day. So at that stage, but honestly, I'll be honest with you, we didn't know about the contact at Nkulumbash. It was mainly a police situation, and I don't know why, because that should have been a good inspiration for us. That our training must be realistic. It's not just playing soldiery. And that's just one of the reasons why I joined the National Defence Force, to protect my country.
Would you say that the training at that stage, and I'm talking about the gymnasium still, would you say that was more conventional, like World War II still, or were they changing to counterinsurgency?
I think it's a very good question. we had a lot of training in counterinsurgency, rural as well as urban. Rural is now patrolling, attack on bases, uh, and this type of thing. And the urban one was more coordinated searches, roadblocks, and controlling of crowds using a deformation and this type of thing. We did those training in a very extensive way, and I think it was very realistic for the time being. And then we had the conventional phase, where we did the 4 phases of the conventional uh, war. The Rhodesians talked of classical war. We talk of conventional war. It's the same thing. And even in their training, uh, at officers training and promotion courses, they also did conventional training. So we did it. And this is where we learned about tanks and the artillery and the phases of war. And on our last exercise, we did a lot of exercises outside the Army Gymnasium in exercises outside. And it was in Potchefstroom, where we had the light aircraft of 42 Flight Squadron helping us there. There were no tanks and these things, but we had to dig trenches, which is very hard in those rocky rabbit areas. But yes, no, we played a very big emphasis on both the 2 phases of war, if I can put it that way.
As you were talking, I was thinking that I'm talking to a general officer here with a lot of experience in the African theatre. Would you say it is different from Europe, soldiering in Africa?
Of course, yes. And the way I want to motivate this, um, and I've learned this in my military career. The Germans will do the best in Germany. The French will do the best in France. Um, and I've got this saying always: if you go to Mozambique, you must be careful because and that applies for any other country there. The people in Mozambique knows what's going on in Mozambique. The people in Zambia knows what's going on there. They know their terrain, their culture, and all these things. Coming back to the situation of the difference between Europe and us. After 1994, we had the opportunity because the world opened. And I'm going to be very open with you. We had joint exercises and visits with the French people, uh, the German officers came and visited us. It was a very good visit. We went over to Brazil, which is on the other side now of Europe. And we even entered the Arab countries by means of Jordan uh, and the Emirates and Oman. Uh, and so you could form a picture. But for me to go into, as an example, into Mozambique, I must adapt to the situations in Mozambique. If the French comes into an African country, and remember one thing, in all the Franconian countries, the French are still there. And you've got to adopt to a country where you are going to. And the terrain will determine, and this is the main lesson that we learned in Angola, the terrain will determine what type of warfare there is. But remember, in any, and I'm talking of the modern day that we are in and in Africa, whether there's a conventional threat and a conventional battle, inside that battle, there will always be this unconventional battle, and let's use the word guerrilla tactics. That is typical of Africa, is to make use of these smaller groups as when you go into a frontal battle, opposing your enemy with everything that you've got against his everything that he's got. So, yes, you must adopt to the situation. I've seen, because I'm going to tell you this story straight. Um, while I was in Special Forces, the SAS, and I've got a very high esteem for them, came over to South Africa. And at which is now my old previous units at the training area, we did an exercise with them. And the scenario was that they landed there and they had to infiltrate into a certain area. And I told them, guys, if you go into the farm areas, don't cut the fences of the farmers. They inspect their fences every day and they will catch you. Okay, fine. Noted, and everything is fine. We had certain areas where they could go or not. And the one group misread their navigation and they saw this big fence in front of them and they opened the fence and they went through. And what did Mr. Farmer do? He had his eyes open and he went in there and he arrested these four guys. And they were um, not with normal police methods, but with ropes and so on. They were tied to a tree, and he phoned us, and I went and I said to them, "What did I tell you? Gee, but these farmers are wide awake. They know what's going on. They know how to handle the thing." And I'm glad they didn't put us into police handcuffs, not handkerchiefs. So that proves the point. When you go into foreign country, you must know what you're doing and you must adapt to the situation there. But that was a very good lesson learned. They were on an exercise. It wasn't war, and it was different. I mean, if this was war and you went into an area and the farmer comes there, obviously shots will be fired. There was no shots fired. And the guys had a very great esteem for the farmer. Luckily, the farmer could speak English because he came from Rhodesia. And he actually felt sorry for these guys. And later they afterwards went back to his house and they had a nice braai there. And this is now the human part of the story. But if you go into a foreign country, you must adapt to that situation and you must know what you're doing. And don't think you bump into a lot of fools. You'll get caught. You'll get caught.
Well, that's interesting to me because that means it's a defensive nature. In other words, you can operate very well in your own area. But the moment that you should go to another country far away from you, outside your own sphere, then you become offensive. Then it's something like the Americans today, who's found fighting not in their own country, but everywhere else. And that's probably why we're not coming over as very good, in my opinion. I don't know. You don't have to tell us what you think of him. It's just my opinion.
You are more than right. And the main thing is, yeah, you must understand the culture, not to offend people by doing certain things to offend them. A language is a big problem. Look at all the interpreters of the Americans in Afghanistan and what's happening to them now. You need interpreters. We had the same situation in Womberland. We couldn't speak with Womberland. And this is very true. No, I fully agree with your stance.
But there is something interesting. So in military history, there was something written with a book with a name, The Jungle is Neutral. I don't know if you're aware of it. It was written by, I think, a Colonel Chapman, who was part of a left behind forces in Borneo or one of these countries which the Japanese overran. And then he wrote a book, a very, very interesting book. It's about this thick. It's really long. I've got two of them. And in it, he said the jungle is neutral, which means you've got the same problems as what the enemy would have to fight in that jungle. And whoever can adapt the quickest and the best to the conditions is the one who's going to win the fight. Would you agree with this?
Yes, provided that there's no local population in the area. If it's purely just jungle, They're just rivers and animals and thick bushes and trees and venomous snakes and all these things. Then that jungle is neutral. But like we had in Novemberland, and this applies for any other country, and I'll come back to the Rhodesian situation, which is a very good example. Uh, the enemy wants the support of the local populations. They can speak the language, they've got the culture, their sons come from those areas and so on. And we didn't have those advantages. The same in Rhodesia. The majority of well, I mean, all of the Zanla, Zam, Zipra people came from that area. And the fight actually for us in Wambuland and in Zimbabwe was about the local population. And that's not a neutral point because they've got the advantage. The uh, Rhodesians lack that advantage. We lack that advantage in Wambuland. But when there's just a big jungle, we've got a area where we used to do training near Nile, where the Nile elephants are. Harkerville is the area. There's nobody staying there. It's empty. There's no locals, nobody. There the jungle is definitely neutral. I read that book, and it's a very good book, and it was based on the situation of the Malaya. Uh, Malaya was a part, uh, especially in the dense bushes where nobody lived. That jungle is neutral. But the moment there's local population, is with the war then runs around the situation. The side who can control the local population, he will win that war.
Yes, it's fascinating to me this because the Malayan principles in counterinsurgency is, of course, something which we studied, even at my low level. Um, Perhaps you can tell us about that if you wish.
Um, of course, we were fortunate that through the Zimbabwean, or let's say the Rhodesian side, there were a few officers, and I'm going to mention names. They both deceased at this stage. There was he ended up as a brigadier, Ivor de Bruin. He came over to the School of Infantry, and he was really the basis of counterinsurgency policies. Another guy, and he saw action in Malaya. Another guy was a guy called Martin Reynolds, very good friend of mine. He also helped us a lot. Uh, then, obviously, our guys did a lot of study about the Mau Mau situation, which is not the same as our situation, but there are lessons that you can learn from that. And we learned a lot of lessons from the Malayan situation, especially the doctrine of patrolling, gathering intelligence, uh, bases, setting up a temporary base, more permanent bases, uh, patrol routine, and these things. Very small, minor tactical things we could learn from there. Remember how, can I say, uh, full uh, at that stage before the 1960s came from the Second World War, which was a desert warfare. And it was a warfare uh, where tanks and artillery and all these things are. And the principles of war still apply, whether it's unconventional or conventional, whether it's counterinsurgency or classical warfare, it doesn't matter. The principles of being a soldier, those principles and the principles of command and controlling your men and all these things are very, very, very good principles. But we really, and I must give those two guys that I mentioned, I must give them their due. They did a lot for us, but a lot of research went into us. Our guys went over to, I was one of them, over to Rhodesia on courses and things like that. I learned a lot there. I'm very honest and frank with you. I learned from them. But again, their war and our war was also two different things. If you compare uh, the operations in the eastern parts of Zimbabwe to Uvambuland. It's two different stories. And what determines that? The terrain, the local population, the politics of the day, the training of the men, and of course your infrastructure and your resources. Your resources is very, very important. So you can't carbon copy. We can't carbon copy today Uvambuland and the war in Indonesia and compare it to South Africa where we are now. When I came back from Uvambuland and was back into the RSA, immediately we were confronted with a lot of urban problems. And I saw this is a different war. And the biggest contact and confrontation that I've been was in 1983 in a black township where 10,000 people attacked us. That was the biggest thing that I've ever experienced. And there were no bushes, it was an open field. So things change, but you've got to adapt to the situation.
How important would you rate knowledge of history to an army officer?
Is there something higher than 100%?
So it's the ultimate, sir. What you're saying to me is you must, if you want to be a good officer, study history. Because why?
You must learn the lessons. You must learn the lessons uh, out of the war, and now going into depth, especially leadership. You learn leadership from that, and you learn uh, handling the politicians. That is a very, very big situation. We were fortunate at the military academy. Uh, I had history in for 3 years in concession, and we did all the wars of the old days. Then the First and the Second World War. We started with the Vietnam War because they're very fresh, and then of course the Anglo-Boer War. Uh, we also studied in detail, uh, and it gave me a thirst to carry on and to study. And not only officers going to the academy, but a lot of my counterparts that didn't even go to the academy, uh, they also studied a lot of history. And especially on staff course, there's one whole week on staff course that you devote to military history and the lessons that you can learn from military history. You must learn uh, from other wars. Otherwise, you don't have an insight. Then you're just a robot soldier without batteries.
I suppose as a young man, when you join the military, you do have ambition. In a sense, you do one day think you're going to be a general yourself and you will be able to do a better job. Is that true?
Yeah, you always. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're wrong till you in that hot seat, and then you understand. It's like criticizing your father for your upbringing, and once you're a father, you see, oh, now I see things from a various distance. What I did, I took the best of all and tried not to make the mistakes that other people made. But sometimes, and you know, the situation in South Africa changed so quickly that actually there was no real role models. I mean, going into a command as a battalion commander, uh, yeah, well, you were in operations as a company commander and as a platoon commander. But that was very quick, and the span from that to being an officer commander, you didn't have a role model.
Now, this is very fascinating to me, as I really love military history. That's the one thing which I think everybody should study because they can learn from it. But tell me, who would you consider to be the best general of all time? Or may
It
I ask
depends
you the
on
best five? It's an unfair
uh,
question, I know.
my favorite is General Montgomery.
Yes, Field Marshal.
Yeah, Field Marshal Montgomery. Uh, in the Anglo-Boer War, uh, it was General De La Rey and General De Wet, of course, the two guys. In my military career, uh, people that stood out was General Constant Viljoen and General Myron. Uh, and I'm talking from the operational side. I'm not talking about the general office situation. I'm talking of operational men. They were really good guys. And then I've got a very great esteem for Chaka coming into the African situation. In the Rhodesian situation, there was a guy called Parker, and his nickname was the King. He was a battalion commander. He unfortunately died in a helicopter accident. Uh, he was an absolute great commander of the Rhodesian Light Infantry. So there's quite a few, but the paramount general is Field Marshal Montgomery, Bernard Montgomery. Despite the fact that the Americans were in charge, as being the Allied forces, and all this, and you know one thing of him that I really learned is he made use of his staff officers. He had a few staff officers, lieutenant colonel. Whenever he issued an order for an assault or a phase of the war, he sent these guys through to the various units, subordinate units, to go and check whether they understood the order. And he was a man's man. He could sit amongst troops and have lunch with them and speak to them. He was not high and mighty. Uh, you know, this little king that sits there. Uh, these things you see as a troop. You see who's the important guy getting out of the car, and everybody's got to salute and do these things. And then you get the guy immediately. You stand to attention, and he greets you with a hand, uh, and he asks you, "What's your name? What are you doing here? How are you?" This is the type, and that example we got from old Monty, if I can call him that.
Well, he was a
Then,
fantastic person. I studied Monty. I have to say I fully agree with you, sir. Montgomery, just perfect. But you know what's the one thing which is interesting to me is every single high commander in the US command had like a girlfriend on the side. And I know there's quite a few people who will frown at this, but I can prove it. Eisenhower as well. His driver wasn't that innocent with himself. He even wrote a book about it. Patton, we all know, Patton was a womanizer. Montgomery was not. He was a widower, and he's not known to ever drink or get drunk or even look at a woman. He was just concentrated on his job to be a general.
I fully agree with that. I want to tell you an interesting story that I read in his book uh, by Hamilton. Um, the Russians one night invited him for a party, well, a supper or something like that. They flew into Dakota, landed there, and he took some of his staff officers with. And Monty didn't drink, but one of his colonels, a Colonel Wright, uh, what Monty didn't drink, he drank. And he got out of order. And Monty just said to the other two, just take him back to the aircraft. And they locked him in the toilet of the Dakota at the back. Because he was a bit obnoxious, this man. And when Monty and them came back, the Russians gave him a 21 gun salute And this guy from the window of the toilet took his service pistol out, and with every gun salute, he fired a few shots. And Monty, of course, reprimanded him, but he didn't chase him away. And he became a major general in the British Army, Major General Wright, just to prove that Monty kept sober. And I think one of the Russian tactics is to drink with the guy and to get his tongue loose and this type of thing. But Monty was a was a Mr. No. General Constantine was the same. His nickname was Coca-Cola Joe because he only drank Coke. He never uh, used alcohol, and he was a general no. There was no problems there with all these other vices that men plow into.
Well, I know that Monty had a dislike in smokers. And so he would walk into a hall to brief people and he would tell them to cough for 5 minutes. And thereafter, no one is allowed to cough.
Yeah, I know that. I also read that. Well, I'm the same way inclined. I'm the same way inclined. I don't like smoking.
There is, of course, a rumor. I don't know if it's true. It's probably not, but us South Africans, we really like to quote this, is that the Field Marshal Montgomery said that if he has 2 South African divisions, he'll take Germany. There's a quote like that flowing around. I'm not sure it's true, but he treated the South African troops under his command with respect.
Yes, that is true. Another guy, Patton, which I also like, the old man. He also said, and he sort of gave a negative thing towards all the other Allied troops. He said, but the South Africans, that's an aggressive bunch of guys that I'd like to go into war with. Yeah, no, most definitely. Monty liked General Smuts very much. He had a great esteem for General Smuts. And he came to South Africa. He even visited the military academy, not in my time, but long before my time. His name is in the visitor's book there. I saw that. Montgomery of LMA. He wrote there in that book. And interesting, I stayed next to the Smuts house in Irene, Victoria. And the great grandson uh, of General Smuts was a guy called Philip Weyers. And one day, while Monty was visiting South Africa, he wanted to visit the Smuts house. And he landed in a helicopter, obviously supplied by our own Air Force. And this little Philip was about 8 years old. And when the general landed and the chopper got to a standstill, this little Philip Weyers ran up to General Montgomery and said, "Hello, Monty, how are you?" And Monty took his hand and shook his hand and brought it back. Oh, Philip told me this story of Montgomery. He very much liked South Africa.
Yes, and he came into the African theater after a lot of calamity, after a lot of problems, and then he turned it around. And I think at that
Oh
stage,
yes, yeah.
probably his greatest job was to get the people back to believe that they can actually win. Because facing them was Rommel.
That's right. That's Monty was the saving grace of the Desert War.
So this brings me to a question to you as a general officer yourself, sir. How important is the men's morale? I always get confused when I say it in English, morale or morale or whatever. How important is that to a unit commander at senior level?
That's the most important thing actually. But uh, morale is a constant phenomenon, and it's a few small things that build morale. But one of the most important things of getting the morale of troops is They must know what they're doing. They must know what they're fighting for. They must know where they're going. And they must be motivated with that. And they must have good equipment. They must have good food. Small things. Uh, they must have ample sleep. But the main element of morale is the general must know his troops. It's impossible. I mean, look at Monty. He couldn't know all his troops. But you know, if he goes down to one unit and he has an informal chat with one or two persons, that spreads like wildfire. Monty came down to us. He talked with us. And then at one stage he did, and he sat down and he had bully beef in the sand with them. And he could listen to the troops. But the main thing is, um, you must know, and this is also a lesson that I learned from Monty. You must know how your troops think, how they will interpret the, the situation, and they must believe in you. And therefore, officer commanding and the general mustn't have weak points. They mustn't see him, and please, I'm not referring to anybody or anything. They mustn't see him drunk, walking around there and shouting and doing this. They mustn't see him telling them to do things and he does the opposite. He must be an example. You must look at him and say, yes, that's a good, it's an idol. I can look up to him, and that's the most important thing. And this takes a lot of work. It takes work, but you must know your men, and you must be. The main thing is a general must be able to listen. He mustn't listen to every story and things like this. But when there's a good story and the troop comes with a good idea, or an officer commanding comes with a good idea, you must listen to that and you must have an ear. You mustn't come in with preconceived ideas, especially when it's technical and strategic elements. And the other main thing of a general, or for that any leader, you must have knowledge. You must have knowledge. You must have background.
Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, or perhaps both, if a general officer becomes eccentric? Not in a way that he's insane, don't mean that. I just know some generals, well, even Montgomery in a certain way, he was not always dressed like a general officer. You wouldn't necessarily know who he is. They were always walking around eating raw onions. That was, I think, in the Far East. Um, do you think a little bit of eccentricity is good or bad?
Yeah, but there's a limit to that. Monty used to dress informal, and he used to mix civilian clothes with military clothes. But when the situation deemed him to be dressed properly, he did that. And he was very informal, although he was disciplined, and you could always look up to him. Um yes, to be eccentric in the military sense is sometimes dangerous. Uh, but if having a bit of humor is eccentric, then it's fine. But if I take another example of being eccentric, old Patton, when the aircraft came in, he ran out with his pistol and started shooting at them. Uh, I don't think that's the right thing to do. A general doesn't appear like that. It's a difficult one. You've asked me a difficult question here, but I think
Well,
always follow the rules.
I was thinking about that. I mean, I know that Montgomery, once he gave an order and the big attack starts taking place, like Al Alamein and the rest, he goes to sleep. He goes to his caravan and he's told him, don't bother me. Let the plan work itself out. Very, very thorough. His staff work was just fantastic, which is something which I really, really admire. But how hard is it for a general officer when the attack goes in and you have to just sit back and wait and you have to trust your men on the ground?
It's difficult. Well, there's one exception. If you join them in front, I'm not talking of running right in front, but if you in that area where you can influence, that's the main thing. You must be able to influence the situation. It's fine, but like for instance, take our situations, and I'm not being negative towards things, but coming to your question, if we had operations in shallow Angola, and the general sits in Grootfontein, which is about 800 kilometers apart. I could be wrong, a few kilometers here and there. It's very difficult to influence because you've just got a radio to influence the situation. Uh, but it is difficult, and the higher up you go into the hierarchy, the further you're away from having a hands-on situation. In our situation, it was easy. I always went into Angola with at least 2 companies, uh, and that one can control. Sometimes three companies that you can control uh, by means of radio, and it's easy then for if you have a break to get the guys together and to speak to them verbally, not just only on the radio, and then going on and to have your influence there in the field. And a very good example for us was old General Viljoen. With various operations, he was up in the front. He wasn't in command directly of that operation, but he was there, and that is important. The commander must be seen to command. I think that's the essence of it.
Well, yes, I do remember while you were talking of General Viljoen actually being in a rattle or something and then stepping out of it. I recall it because I was struck that he was wearing an R4 rifle or R5, and I was thinking, well, he really looked like he could use it as well, which obviously he could. It was done on one of the earlier operations. I don't know if you remember the incident.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
saw it on television, of course. Yeah, fascinating.
And he even was in a landmine situation.
Yes,
And he's
I
called,
think it struck a landmine and he could
yeah,
have been injured, but he wasn't, thank God.
and his
So,
call sign was Alpha Alpha 5. I won't forget that. He was that was his call. Well, he was on the radio net.
okay, so if I understand you correctly, this could be seen as the German type of style of command, in the sense that you leave your chief of staff behind to run the office, and you yourself as the commanding general will go out and visit the troops and command.
You are talking of Rommel.
Yes.
Rommel did that. His 2IC was left in the echelons behind, and he could influence the battle from the front. Rommel was absolutely a handbook example of that. Yes, um, this is when, uh, in all humbleness, when our biggest successes were in 5-4 Battalion, when I went out with the various companies into the area to attack bases and things like that.
Also, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking about this, and I'm sure so would be the readers, or sorry, the listeners here. When you start talking about generalship, I think that is another episode on itself. But it's fascinating to me to hear your views. Thank you for that. But let's just go back to the Army Gymnasium quickly. Is there anything about the Army Gymnasium which I perhaps didn't ask you, which you wish to bring to our attention?
No, of course, I think we've covered everything. Uh, it was a great formative year, and a few incidents, perhaps a humorous one that I can mention. I was on guard at the main gate one day. And this is just a lesson in life that I learned. And a certain sergeant, I'm not going to mention names, came up to me and said, listen, but I could smell that he had a few beers behind his back. He said to me, you see my car there? Go and guard my car because my Springbok blazer is in that car. And I said to him, I'm sorry, Sergeant, I'm not going there. This is my post that I've been posted to at the main gate. I will have an eye on there, and if somebody goes near your car, and he started being very cross with me. I won't recall the words that he said to me, but I stood my ground, and I was standing to attention and spoke to him. And later years, I moved into a command position, and the RSM came in, and I said, Major, sit down. You remember that incident? That was me standing guard there, and that was your car and your Springbok blazer. The pails of red in his face. And then we became very good friends. No, there was no hardships about that. I mean, I'm not referring back to that situation. Another thing of, and I'm also not going to mention names, inside the bungalows, a little bit away, was a single quarter of an old sergeant major. He wasn't married. He was an old bachelor. And one night he came back, and the guys timed him. The moment that he's undressed, they're going to throw stones on the roof. And the timing was perfect. He just had his pajama top on, and he came out running and started screaming and said, fall in, fall in, fall in. And we all fell in, and we started singing, how the hell can we believe you? And the old man went back. And the lesson that I learned there is if you go out for the evening and you have a few drinks, don't let people make a mockery out of you. And I also later in life, as a major, met up with this old guy, but I didn't have the guts to tell him that I was one of the guys with the stones on his roof. And he reformed, he became a teetotaler, he got married, and for the good of him. Unfortunately, the old man is also now deceased. But these were lessons as a young man that we've learned. But the Army Gymnasium was a very great formative year in my personal life and in the lives of various guys.
And from there on, you were chosen to go to a military academy. And with that, I think
That
we will,
that's correct. Yes.
yes, we will definitely deal with that in the second episode. General, I have to thank you. You know, when I was speaking to you, the time just flew. It just went. And I'm trying to now limit these episodes to about an hour and a half. I had some letters from the folks complaining a bit, but you know, you can always do a pause button. Sometimes we do want to speak a lot, and I'm hardly the one to say to anybody, keep quiet. You know, I struggle myself to do so. So thank you very much, sir. I think we'll carry on with a military academy, and then we'll build up and build up. This is going to take, I think, at least 5 or 6 episodes, probably more. If any of you have questions for the general here, please leave it below. Spread the word about this channel. We're trying to help. At some stage in the future, we're going to bring a psychologist here as well who can talk to you about post-traumatic stress disorder. I believe he was a serving officer in 32 Battalion. And we're talking to him to come and help.
Well, thank you. It was great speaking to you, and you're having an interview with a man who did his homework and who's got the knowledge that can speak on these topics. And thanks for not asking yet political questions. But if we get there, we will try and double cross that bridge.
Well, yes, we will definitely get to it. So we will talk about it, but you know, we're not hopping back to the past. We're just trying to create a picture here for those who follows us, because that makes you also extremely important to me, because you did take command of Special Forces just in those changing years after Mr. Mandela took over. And that's fascinating, because we really need to know what happened